I'm Brad Oster. Thank you for joining us at Harvestime University. Today we're going to be talking about the various government agencies that you work through when you're looking to develop a new church facility. You know, it used to be that you could just go out and buy a piece of property and put up a building, you know, pretty much anywhere. I guess this was going back quite a ways, but you know, today it can be a fairly complicated process depending on where you live. We've had areas, Tempe, Arizona. You know, if you're a church in Tempe and you're looking at putting up a new building, I think my advice is move. The same thing if you're in like Boulder, Colorado. There are places today that are so hostile towards churches. I think it is really kind of their goal to aggravate and frustrate you to the point where you just throw up your hands and give up. And it's sad because, you know, unfortunately Boulder, for example, Boulder, Colorado, I know of several churches that have left town. I mean, they literally sold their old campus and they're buying land, you know, in other incorporated areas, not far from Boulder, but they just gave up, you know, because Boulder doesn't apparently want them. So it can be a very difficult process. But, you know, then on the other side, I go to some places where, you know, you go in and meet with somebody. I remember when I first interviewed in Lubbock, Texas for a project there. I went to the planning department. I was just interviewing with the church, happened to be called Trinity, and I met with the planning department, and I was just trying to feel, you know, okay, what's the process here? What are the steps? And I told them about the church I was hoping to work with, and they bought 80 acres, and they're looking at building a family life center. And the guy looked over the counter at me and said, "Well, where's y'all's plans?" And I said, "Well, we haven't drawn the plans yet. What I want to do is find out what are the steps that we go through to get zoning approval, a conditional use permit, all the different environmental regulations and clearances." You know, I grew up developing in California, so I thought, you know, every place was like California. Well, the guy he laughed at me, and he said, "Y'all aren't from around here, are you?" And I said, "No, sir, I'm not." He says, "I'll bet you're from California." And I said, "That obvious, is it?" And he said, yeah. He said, here's the first step. Bring me your full set of design drawings." And I said, "Full set, working drawings, everything done?" He goes, "Yes." I said, "What's the second step?" He goes, "Y'all come back in 2 weeks and get your permit." And I said, "So I come back in 2 weeks and I get plan check comments?" He goes, "Oh, no. He says, "We'll take care of that during the 2 weeks. Y'all come back in 2 weeks, get your permit." And I thought, my goodness, Texas is the promised land, you know. So you've got great extremes, you know. Boulder, where a high-priced land use attorney couldn't get a church through, to Lubbock, Texas, where I could draw it on a napkin. So what I'm hoping to do with this class is give you sort of the middle ground there, you know, that we see most often, the processes that we go through, you know, in developing churches all across the United States. And we have projects in Naples, Florida. I've got 2 in Pennsylvania. I've got 1 in Anchorage, Alaska, 2 in California, and I've got them kind of scattered all over. But pretty good exposure, you know, to what it takes from a government processing standpoint, you know, to get your use permit and everything done, get your building permit, and get you under construction. So that's the goal with this class, is kind of walk you through that, and hopefully at the end of this class you will feel much more comfortable with your knowledge of what it takes to go about getting a building put on your property. Now, first thing, everything always starts at the planning department. Okay, but as soon as you buy a piece of property and hopefully, you know, you've done your homework when you bought the property. We have a class here at Harvestime University called Creative Land Acquisition, and we have forms that are available when you take that class. So hopefully if you bought some property, you've taken that class and utilized those forms, because then you'll be up to speed, you know, on what the current zoning is, if there's any environmental issues, those sort of things. So, you know, one of the first things you want to do is understand, you know, the land that you have and what is your current zoning. You know, is it residential? Is it agriculture? You know, a lot of times in agricultural zoning, there's what's called church use by right, which means that you don't have to go get rezoned. You can put a church on agricultural property by right. It's included in what they call agricultural zoning, that church use is okay. As it is in most residential zones, whether it's R1, R2, R3, typically you can put a church in a residential zoning with the process called the conditional use permit, and that would apply also for the agricultural, so it's fairly easy. So the first thing you need to do is understand your current property and what the zoning is. The first step in working with the government as far as getting your use permits and your zoning taken care of is basically just to go down to the counter. And when I say go down to the counter, that's the people who do this would know what that means. Go down to the planning department, okay, at the city hall where the city services are. There's planning department, building department, oftentimes the police department's there, the municipal courts and the mayor's office and all that jazz. But go to the planning department, just go to the counter. Now, at the counter, they have a person who is on the planning staff. They call them planner of the day, and their job is to kind of man the counter there. And they're there to assist you, to answer questions, to provide you with forms and applications, and basically just be sort of the happy, smiley face representing the planning department to the public. And they do a great job. They're a fountain of information. You can get a lot of information there within just, maybe 10 or 15 minutes in a conversation with the planner of the day. So often we start there. One of the first things, once we have done that, is you go back and you have your architect put together a real preliminary design. Now, you don't have to involve the civil engineer. It doesn't have to be detailed much at all. Basically what we call a bubble diagram, where you take the drawing, and in fact, it could even be on an 8.5 by 11, just so it shows your entire site and the street so that they can identify, okay, which piece of property is it, where is it? Is it on Main Street? Is it on First? Is it on Broadway? Where is this piece of property? So you'd have the street labeled out there. It should be properly dimensioned. If it's a site that looks like a shoebox, then it should look like a shoebox on paper as far as the way it's scaled. And then basically a bubble diagram would just show circles on there that would say, well, we're thinking of an entry here and an entry here. Our phase 1 building right about here. Maybe eventually we want to build a large worship center, an athletics center. We got a softball field back here. Maybe a prayer garden or an amphitheater or something back here. But just a very basic, simple bubble diagram. Okay, and that's what you want to take when you go down and you meet with the planning department. Once you have that, they'll give you some general feedback. They'll usually go out and pull out maps and look at zoning and all this other stuff and come back and say, well, it's agricultural or it's residential, so it's church use by right, but we'll have to go through a conditional use permit process. That will involve, the planning department approval, city council approval. They kind of lay out the whole strategy for you, most of which we're going to cover here in the next hour or so. But anyway, from that bubble diagram, you get a pretty good feel there from the planning department as to what it's going to take to do the drawing. Then what you want to do is go back, take that drawing and have it polished up a little bit. Okay, still not, not final detailed drawings by any stretch. Not even with the civil engineer involved yet, as far as your site plan. Just have your architect draw the thing up on CAD. Look at the floor plans. You can go ahead and get your floor plans done for your phase 1 building. Let's say you bought 30 acres, and the first thing you want to build is let's just make something up here, a 500-seat, 30,000 square foot, 2-story, multi-purpose family life center. Well, what you want to do is have your architect draw that up to scale on your site, showing phase 1, fairly clear as far as the size and shape of the building and the location. Phase 2 can be an outline, future worship center, future gym or whatever. Show the parking areas, but again, not a whole lot of detail. Then what you do is you go down and you file an application to have what's called a pre-app meeting. It's just a simple form that you fill out. A pre-app meeting stands for simply pre-application.